tell you, in my heart, I felt he was dead. It was just a father's intuition.
That was Richard Lampe of Westfield, Indiana. Richard lost his son Jacob to a fentanyl poisoning in July of 2022. Over the next hour, you'll hear from Richard share Jacob's tragic story, a father's grief, and the investigation that led to justice for the death of Jacob Lampe. This is the DEA Chicago Podcast. I'm your host, Luis Agostini. Let's jump right in. Welcome, Richard Lampe. Thank you for joining us. And first off, I'd just like to give you an opportunity to tell me and everyone who might be tuning in to tell us, who was Jacob Lampe? What kind of kid was Jake? Please tell us all about Jacob Lampe.
So basically, growing up, very normal, very social, lots of friends, very active in the normal sports as a child, but was always very active with animals because his mother was in the veterinary field for his whole life. So he was always exposed to a lot of animals, and ultimately, as he grew, started rescuing his own animals. He left behind three dogs that he had rescued, and so that was something he was passionate about. He also grew into a very good golfer. Starting at age 11, he started playing golf, and all of a sudden he just took to it, and it became his sport, to where he was able to play in junior PGA tournaments, things such as that. Ultimately went to some long-term training away from us for a while in Orlando, Florida, and also in Hilton Head Island. So that's kind of what he was as far as that goes. Once he graduated from high school, which would have been in Westfield, Indiana, which is north of Indianapolis, he started attending college and was very into psychology, was thinking about going into maybe some sort of counseling, things like that, or just having it as a separate aspect of knowing when he wanted to get into business. But that's kind of where he was heading at the time. It seemed like he was on a good path with that, and everything was really progressive in a really, really good spot until about the time he hit 19, when he started, having a little bit of trouble with some addiction issues off and on and things like that. Nothing that sent him over the edge to where he was just not function anymore, but enough for his parents for us to be concerned, I would say.
What happened when, I guess, tell us about when, from the information that you have and have discovered, just what happened when Jacob had passed away, and I guess if the events leading up to it.
Yeah, and I guess to just expand for one more thing on the addiction issue, one thing that I've gone back on, and I've always believed this, and I've always timelined it, Jake getting his wisdom teeth out, he was overprescribed, I believe, pain pills. I think that's been a common problem in the United States for a long time with adolescents getting wisdom teeth out, which is a common thing. And then that's where it starts. So it seems that there are some relationships between surgeries for teenagers and getting overprescribed, I think, sometimes, or just being prescribed pain pills, which I'm hoping that's being curbed nowadays, and I hear it is, but I don't know if you've heard that, but I mean, that's been something we've all kind of traced his issue back to, which started it. So that was one of the things. And then basically what happened, we had gone on for several years with really, Jake just seemed to be functioning fine, working his job, continuing classes, trying to finish up his degree. And then we were always apprehensive about anything that he would do, or if he was, if he was starting to struggle again. So I tracked all of his bank accounts, phone records, everything, just because as a teenager, he had always been on my account. So I just kept him on there because I was always a little concerned that he might have some issues. Well, the day that he passed was he was supposed to be at work, and my parents had actually stopped by his work to pick some stuff up and also to say hi to him. And my mother had reached out to me and said, "Hey, Jake's not at work." They said he never showed up. Well, that was unheard of for him. So my mind went to something that was so dark, but ended up being so real. And I actually called his mother and said, "Are you home yet?" Because Jake was staying at his mom's house. She said, "Yeah, I'm pulling in." I said, "Is Jake's car there?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "Okay, I need you to go into his office or his room." Well, both the doors were locked. I knew we had a problem then. In fact, at that point, I can tell you in my heart, I felt he was dead. It was just a father's intuition. And sure enough, for the next 15 minutes, I listened to his mom's phone lay on the ground where she ended up having to break the window from the outside of the house and crawl in there. And then, I heard the screams, and basically she had found him dead, but proceeded to perform CPR on him, make a 911 call, which was actually played in full in court. I did not listen to that, but I think it was pretty graphic and pretty tragic, and I'm glad I didn't, because I heard enough with her.
I can imagine.
Well, I can't even tell you. I thought I died that day. In a lot of ways I did. And I think that it was always my biggest fear that I would get that call or something like that would happen. I think I thought about it every day. And the funny thing is, and it's not funny, but I told somebody one time shortly thereafter, I said, "There's only one relief that came from this." And they looked at me funny, and I said, "I used to go to bed every night wondering if I'm getting the call tonight that something had happened to Jake. And now I get to go to bed every night never worrying about the call, because the call came, and now it can't come again." And that's a terrible, terrible thing to say or to look at it, but it's the truth. I don't have to think about that call coming again because it happened and it's gone. I hate to say that, but I mean, it's a weird thing that I came up with one day talking to someone. I said, "Isn't that an odd thing?" And they said, "No, it's not an odd thing. It's interesting that you look at it that way." And I do. It's horrible, and it was a horrible day for me, but I never have to worry about that call again. It's a strange way to look at something, and I thought, well, if there's any peace that could ever come from something so tragic, I guess it's that I don't go to bed at night worrying about the call because the call came. So, and I know there's a lot of parents that go to bed that way every single night. I know that for a fact.
How did you manage to cope, to process in the weeks and from after until today? Through today.
Well,
tomorrow.
I would say, the first couple of weeks, well, I had to go on like cruise control, tunnel vision. I was extremely numb, really. I don't remember a lot of what the 2 weeks after that were. I do remember, though, digging into some things and starting to think that I think I know what's happened here. And that's when I started, after the funeral, then I started really digging and reaching out and starting to try and get help from your agency and things like that, and figure out how can I piece this together, because I think I see enough odd things that have happened within his accounts to know that we've got an issue here. I think there was a transaction that happened here, and I think I know who did it. So that's how I started coping. I kind of went on to a survival instinct and a battle mindset, that I'm going back to work. I went back to work right away. People were shocked, but it's just how I operate, because I could lay down and die, or I could just keep going, and that's what I needed to do. That's my instinct. So that's what I did. And I consumed my time with going to work and also trying to put as much as I could together about what I thought happened and try and get in front of the authorities to listen to me and say, look, I think I've got a lot of stuff here and I think I can give it to you on a silver platter. And that's what I did for a long time.
Can you talk through some of those pieces of, I guess we can call it evidence, or just
Mm-hmm.
the proof, the evidence that kind of, you know, the hunch you had, the theory that you had that kind of validated what your your instincts were? What were some of those pieces of evidence, or those crumbs of evidence?
Well, the biggest one, and this is the one that ultimately, um, I think, started to sink the guy that killed him. I was going through his bank statements within a couple days, and all of a sudden, the same day he was killed, I noticed something called Cash App. Cash App Ben. Well, the gentleman that killed him, and he's not a gentleman, but his name is Ben Ingram. Well, I didn't know what Cash App was. Okay, I knew what PayPal was and some stuff like this, but 2 years ago, these kids were using all kinds of stuff. There was never a Cash App transaction for him, and so I started thinking, okay, this is very strange, and it happened the same day as this. So I thought, this is definitely a piece of evidence. I knew for a fact it was. It had to be. And so then I started thinking, well, maybe there's more to this. Ultimately, we could not get into his computer. We could not get into his phone. However, we left them plugged in. Okay, we left them powered up. I don't know why I had the instinct to do that, but I just made sure it was done. I was thinking of all these things. How can I try and deliver this to whoever? So these were all things that, in my mind, I was thinking, I think this is going to ultimately be what's going to lead to this. So that's kind of the main pieces of evidence, and then being able to turn over the phone, the computer, anything and everything we had as a family. We did not fight the authorities on that. We wanted all that handed over, and this is what I always speak at the summits and things like that you host, is don't fight the authorities on what they're asking for. Turn everything over. I believe, and I've said this before, some parents maybe have had their own issues with the law, and my point is they're not concerned about what your issues may have been or may be. They are concerned about finding who harmed your child or killed your child. Give them what they need. Please turn everything over. And that ultimately was a huge help, because you folks were able to ultimately not only open the computer, open up the phone, and open up the the other guy's phone as well, and then we're able to even extract voicemails that were played in the courtroom from the dealer. They were in the courtroom. So all of those things are what I started gathering and turning anything and everything over that I thought could be of any use at all. And I also printed off 12 months of bank statements with every single transaction in order to turn those over, which ultimately Agent Justin Brandt was in charge kind of the investigation after Agent Gannon got involved, and I was able to turn all of those things over to him. And every time he asked for additional documentation, I was able to get it quicker than he could. He would need a warrant. I happened to be on the account, so I could go into the bank and just get everything printed, scan it, and send it to him. So that's how I kind of work that angle of it, to try and help move it along quick and also save everybody else a lot of time.
When Jake was still here, Did you? How familiar were you with the opioid crisis, or and he had mentioned that you had noticed that you felt he may have been overprescribed after his wisdom tooth surgeries, but the opioid crisis and fentanyl. Were you familiar with what was happening across the country with this?
Yeah, at some points, I think I could have had a PhD in it. I studied it daily. I was reading about it. I was hearing about it. I was lecturing him on it, to the point where I said, just so you know, if you buy something off the street, you're committing suicide. You're going to be dead. Okay. Because that's how bad this is. I said, you cannot buy anything off the street. You just cannot afford to. And he's like, I know. I'm scared about it too, Dad. But I was very aware of it. I knew it was becoming a huge issue because I read a lot about it and I studied it. So I was very aware with it. I was not somebody that was ignorant of this. Only, and the reason is because I thought my childhood had a problem off and on, and I wanted to be damn sure I knew what's happening, how big is this, how prevalent is it, how easy is it for it to get them, and what's causing all of these deaths that I was starting to hear about. So fentanyl was a word I had absolutely heard about, because I actually said, probably the next day after his death, I said he was killed by fentanyl. Now, we didn't have the tox reports back, but I had said it from day one. And everybody that knows me, that talked to me about it, I said, no, I know exactly what this is. I knew exactly what it was. So, yeah, I was very familiar with it.
You mentioned Brandt and Gannon and working with them. What was that experience like when you knew that the DEA was going to be involved in this investigation, and what was that communication like?
It was very nice. It was pretty. I was pretty impressed by the communication. Ultimately, I had reached out to a lady in local media who actually, we were on her program this morning. I had reached out to her and said, hey, I have a story you might want to know about, because this crisis is starting to happen, but this is something that, happened to a family in a suburb where maybe you would think it wouldn't happen, we'll say. Okay. Now, that was 2 years ago. So obviously we're seeing that change dramatically. A lot of families in those areas weren't even wanting to talk about it at the time. I'm one of the first probably around here that went public and said, no, this happened. My son made a stupid ass mistake and this happened. So I look at it and think, wow, to think that within a day or two of reaching out with this reporter, she had reached out to Gannon. Gannon had called me. We had a long conversation, and probably within an hour after that, I had Agent Justin Brandt calling me and wanting to meet with me and start the process prior to having the tox report back from the coroner. So this investigation was launched, I would say, within 3 weeks after Jake's death, yet still pending tox reports. But I told them my story and said, I am certain this is going to come back as a fentanyl death. I am certain of it. And sure enough, it did. But I also believe they did a lot of investigation prior to that. And I'm not so sure, when I gave them the Cash App information, I'm not so sure that they might not have already had something. This is all speculation for me because we're not privy to all of this, but I do believe that helped move that investigation forward. So the minute we were able to send the tox report to them, then they were able to really move pretty quick and had the man arrested not too long after that.
When you first heard the name of Benjamin Ingram, or I'm sure you had your suspicions it was him, but when you first received the news that he was going to be held responsible, that he was going to be charged in connection with Jacob's death, what was that reaction like?
Well, I had never heard anything but the first name. Okay. So I didn't know who Cash App Ben was, but I knew whoever this Ben was had to be the dealer. Once they came to my home that morning after his arrest, 5 or 6 DEA agents showed up at my home with Gannon leading them, and they let me know who it was. Jake didn't know this guy as a friend, and Jake didn't know this guy. Apparently, he didn't know him very long. He had made several buys from him, according to the testimony in court, but this was not a long-term relationship. We knew nothing about this guy. We still don't know how he met him. We actually have never pieced this together. But I will tell you, I was just kind of like thinking to myself, okay, I wonder who this guy is. This is interesting. I have no idea who he is. But it was funny because it did end up to be Cash App Ben, which was from day one. That was always my thing. If you follow this Cash App, I think you're going to find the killer.
So he goes through trial. He pled not guilty, right?
Correct. And he also turned down a plea deal from the prosecutor's office of 24 years.
Did that add to your frustration?
No, it actually didn't. I was told, as much as I could be told by law, I was told that it was not good to be Benjamin Ingram. The prosecutor told me that, and the DEA agents told me that I don't see us losing this case. In fact, Agent Brandt said, I don't see how I could possibly lose this case. And he knew he was going to be special. He was going to be an expert witness, so he was going to be able to go into other areas of this. And also the fact with Indiana having one of the toughest laws on this that not every state has, I think the prosecutor was quite shocked that he wouldn't take the 24 years, knowing that he virtually had no defense. But it was just something that I thought, okay, well, here we go. I wasn't frustrated. I just had in my heart of hearts, I thought, okay, then this means when that judge lays the gavel down one day, I think you're going to wish you would have taken the 24 years. And well, as we look back to a week ago or so, I bet he wishes he took the 24 years because he got a hell of a lot more than that.
So they did not end up losing the case. They returned a verdict of guilty. And talk through, just your feelings. I'm sure it's a lot of mixed emotions, and when you heard the verdict as well as the sentencing.
Yes, I think those 5 days at the courthouse, it was extremely hard going to the courthouse every day. And these were 9-hour days, okay? And this was a full-on 12-person jury trial, full courtroom, all kinds of things. I think it was very stressful, wondering how are we doing? How's things going? I was a witness, so I was kicked out of the courtroom the first 3 days of the trial until it was my turn to testify. And it was very unnerving. Now, I do remember the last day. I got to sit in for closing arguments, all of that. And then it must have been noon on the last day of the trial when everybody was done and it went to the jury. And they said, well, stick around for a while, but the judge wants them to go to at least, 8 or 9 tonight, if that's what it takes, and try and get a verdict tonight, because we were heading into Memorial Day weekend, if I remember right. Or 4th of July weekend. I'm sorry. We were heading into 4th of July weekend, and he really wanted this done. And I had sat down across the street for lunch, and I got a call and said the verdict's in. This was 2 hours and 12 minutes after they got it. And I thought, I don't know what this means. This is a really, really fast verdict. I have no idea what this means. So we scooted back to the courthouse and, in a little bit got in there, and everybody sat down. The judge gets everything in order. And then all of a sudden, the verdict comes back guilty. And it was just very emotional, quietly emotional, but we just sat there and just sobbed because it was, it was almost 2 years, almost 2 years to the day he was killed, that this man was found guilty. And I just found it very, very ironic. that was happening. But it was good. It was a good feeling. And then waiting for 30 days for sentencing was interesting because the prosecutor had called, said, "This is what I'm asking for. This is what we're going to bring up. We can bring up some additional items now." They were not able to bring up all of his criminal history, all of his outstanding warrants that were still happening, all of these things during the trial. They couldn't bring anything up about that. It was intriguing to learn how little victims' rights we really have, because they could bring anything they wanted up about my son, which there wasn't a criminal record to bring up or anything, but they could bring up whatever they wanted. Yet anything about this man that talked about his criminal past, including some pretty damning things, could not be brought up. So I found that intriguing. Now, once it got to sentencing last week, it was interesting because the judge basically sentenced a little harsher than what I thought. I thought he was going to go a little lower, but he went almost to the max. Indiana offers 40 years, and this, he went for like 35 years, I believe, 30 years plus 5 years supervised release. And I was kind of surprised, but the judge had some pretty harsh statements about never being held accountable in his 36 years of life, having no remorse, and some things such as that, and basically saying how fentanyl is devastating his courtroom right now. And he is seeing it time and time again, and it absolutely has to be stopped, and examples have to be made because this can't continue. So I was very happy with the verdict, and it was more than I thought, and it was more than Agent Gannon thought. The nice thing was, though, the DEA agents all showed up for sentencing that day and sat behind me, and that was really such a show of force. I never thought that I would be talking to DEA agents who actually had a heart, not in a bad way, but I mean, as a normal human being who's never dealt with federal agents, you figure they're probably very cold and very callous. Well, that's not the case. These people all have families, including yourself, and they actually do care about the victims, and they've been extremely supportive of my whole family during this. And so that was really nice to see them pretty much support us from day one all the way through sentencing. And I really had a lot of respect for them when I saw them all show up that day.
So Ingram held responsible for Jacob's death. Where do you go from here? How does your journey continue as far as, one, taking care of yourself, father who lost his son, taking care of yourself and making sure you continue receiving, the supports you need and finding strength where you can, but also honoring, Jake's memory?
Well, yeah, and that's been tough. Over the past 2 years, there's been a lot of collateral damage within the family. I don't think people realize how much more happens. Okay, it's yes, it's the death of Jacob, but it also ruined a marriage. All of this happening during that time. This is not uncommon, but there's a lot of other things that happen within a family when something this tragic happens. So what I did shortly, within a couple months after Jake's death, is I did start a foundation, and we have built it up and kind of made two pillars out of it. One is to support underfunded animal shelters, which we do, and I volunteer at, and we help support them. And the other thing, we set up a pretty large scholarship fund at a large local addiction treatment center, and under Jacob's name, anybody under the age of 25 years old that is admitted to it but can't afford their deductible, we will pay it for them, as long as they can prove that they cannot afford it. Because deductibles in addiction treatment are not like deductibles going to the dentist. And that's one thing that I don't think people understand, that insurance companies aren't as friendly with addiction treatment as they are with a normal surgery on your knee or something like that. So we found that disturbing, to think that somebody might be turned away due to lack of being able to pay a deductible or something like that, which can be $4,000 to $6,000. So that's been something nice. We've actually received 3 letters this year so far of young adults that we have scholarship through there who have come out, and now they're kind of on their road to rebuilding their lives, and send us very sincere letters that just rip your heart out when you read them. But then you also think, wow, look what we did. Look what we did. And so that's nice. And that's how I'm going to continue to keep his name alive and his memory alive. And honestly, it's very good therapy for me. It's extremely good therapy for me to continue to go out there. If people ask me to speak at certain things, I will. If people want to do news interviews, it's extremely uncomfortable for me to do that. It's one thing for me to talk about something in my profession, but when I have to talk about my dead child, let me tell you, that adds a whole new layer of stress and emotions for me. To have to go on TV and talk about that. That's a whole different world. And I'm going to continue to do it because I'm not hiding what happened, but I'm not ashamed of my son. He made a stupid mistake. I'm not ashamed of him. And I'm going to continue to share this story out there so others, can get out there and not be ashamed either.
One thing you said at I believe it was the last summit, or maybe the one before last. I think the second summit we had in Rosemont.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. You had mentioned. I think you gave a lot of credit to the mothers that were in the room, and kind of expressed. I'm not sure if it was disappointment or kind of just some strong encouragement, but almost that we need to see a more show of force, or more advocacy, or just like really vocal support from fathers as well. Maybe just we were hearing so much more from the moms than, or at least the presence, showing up when and dealing with something like this than dad. So if you could speak, maybe just use this to kind of build on that, what you were trying to get across, as far as the need for fathers to really invest, as hard as it is to be invested and be vocal and engage.
Yeah, that's interesting, and you're right. I did speak to that at one of the conferences. I will tell you this, and I have talked to a lot of families, and every time I do any type of news program or Mike and I did a 30-minute mini documentary out here one time. Every time this happens, I will have lots of private Facebook messages hit me, and I reach out to the people. Many, many, many times it is 90% the mothers. There is an overwhelming thing though that comes through when I talk to them about the husband, the father, whatever. There is a huge amount of guilt these fathers have about failing as a father. There is a large amount of embarrassment and a bruising of their ego. And that is the common theme I've found. And that's where I have kind of gone the opposite direction and said, look, I'm not embarrassed. I'm not a failure as a father. I didn't cause this. I did everything. Anytime that Jacob got himself in a situation where I thought he was going down the wrong road, I would get him treatment. I would do what I needed to do. But there is something about the fathers that there's this overwhelming theme where I'm seeing they tend to carry more guilt. They want to be a little more secretive about it, I guess. Maybe it's bruising their ego, and they do feel like they failed as a parent more so than the mothers want to get out there and try and pursue justice. A lot of the fathers don't even want to pursue justice. They want to sweep it under the rug and be done with it because they just don't want anybody to know what has happened. Because there is somehow they feel they've failed, and they don't want everybody to know they've failed, and that's just not the case. And if they would get more involved, I think they would find that it probably would help them, and it would definitely help their mental state with what they're going through, and just let the guilt go, because there shouldn't be any guilt. But that's the theme. That's a common theme that I've found as I talk to people who reach out to me.
So you have experience in, I guess, you using your experience to support other parents that are going through this for the first time. What message do you have for people who will listen to this and they're currently coping with the loss of a loved one. They want to pursue justice. They want accountability. Just what message do you have for those families?
The message would be, if you want to pursue justice and you're serious about it, you have to make that decision immediately. You cannot hold off for 2 years and expect it's going to be easy then for the authorities to get involved. The quicker you decide that you want justice, you better be willing to turn over phones, computers, bank statements, and you better do it within weeks, because every day that passes by, you're hurting the case. And you cannot expect an agency to take something 2 years later after you've decided, oh, okay, now we want to pursue justice. Well, 2 years have gone by. That's a very, very low chance of actually being able to probably get a conviction and even maybe track the person down. So I would encourage anybody that thinks they want to get justice, then you better make the decision right away. I did talk to one mother at one of your conferences, and she said, well, I don't want to give up all of the pictures on his cell phone. And I said, ma'am, that you cannot tell me that you don't have 1,000 more pictures somewhere in your life of him. And I said, secondly, are you telling me you'd rather let this man continue to go kill people than give up some cell phone pictures? I said, I would tell you, you need to think much differently about that. And I did it in a nice way, but my point is, I don't care how many pictures we lost on Jake's phone. I don't know how much has been destroyed. I just don't care. We have plenty of pictures of Jake, but we stopped the guy from killing people on the street. And I'm certain this man killed more than my son. He's a serial killer. I am certain. So that's what my advice would be, is you better move quick.
Is there anything else you wanted to get across today, or if I know we covered a lot of ground, but basically the floor is yours.
I think that one thing I will tell you, I've always called every parent back that's reached out to me, every single time. I also reached out to parents when I was new to this club that nobody wants to be in. They always were kind to me, and I've made some wonderful friends. And now it's interesting to see myself 2 years down the road and people reaching out to me. And now I'm not the new one in the club anymore. But that's what I would say. I will always continue to answer phone calls and talk to parents going through this. And I remember, I can say, I know what you're feeling, and they can say, I know what you're feeling. So that's the one part about our club that nobody wants to be in. We can honestly say, I know what you're going through. And that's hard to find sometimes. So I do think it's good for grieving parents to reach out to one another, because somehow having that conversation when somebody can actually say and mean it, I know what you're going through, you can have a little better conversation. And you seem to find some comfort in an odd sort of way of talking to somebody that's going through or been through what you're going through. So that's what I would say. And any parents that, ever listen to this, I would say, please always take phone calls from anybody going through this. Or if you know somebody that's struggling and not wanting to reach out to anybody, reach out to them and make sure they're okay, because the mental health of parents deteriorates very quickly after they go through this. And if you don't find a purpose and a way to live a purposeful life after this, you will probably end up living a short life. And I have found a purposeful life, and I don't intend to die young. I'm going to continue to do this because I don't want that man to kill a second person. And, it's just kind of how I feel. But I think you have to find a way to live a purposeful life after this, or you probably won't live very long. So that's kind of what I would say.
That concludes our interview with Richard Lampe. I'd like to thank Mr. Lampe for joining us and for showing an immense amount of courage and bravery in sharing his very tragic story. Fact is that Richard is not alone. There are many mothers and fathers out there who are mourning the loss of their loved ones due to a fatal fentanyl poisoning. And the DEA Chicago Field Division, we're doing everything we possibly can whether it's supporting a local law enforcement investigation or sharing our resources as part of a law enforcement investigation, or simply showing respect and dignity to these families and helping them channel their grief into purpose. Over the next few episodes, you'll hear from a mother who also lost her son to a fatal fentanyl poisoning, as well as the DEA agent whose team investigated and delivered justice for both of these deaths. Until next time, this is the DEA Chicago Podcast. I'm Luis Agostini.